The morning Deborah Whitmore declared that roof snow removal after sunset was now prohibited by our HOA. I knew my engineering degree was about to become the most useful thing in my life. My name is Quincy Jameson, and I had just moved into the Pine Ridge community in Boulder, Colorado, 3 months earlier. The neighborhood sat at the base of the Rocky Mountains, where snowfall was not just common, but could be downright dangerous. I bought my house specifically because of the views and my love of winter sports, but I quickly learned that living under an HOA meant your common sense took a backseat to arbitrary rules. I was in my garage that Tuesday morning, organizing my tools when Deborah showed up at my driveway with her clipboard. She was 52, had that particular haircut that seemed mandatory for HOA board presidents, and wore a puffy vest over her turtleneck despite the cold being well below freezing. "Quincy, I need to inform you of the new community regulation," she said, not bothering with a greeting. I set down the wrench I was holding and turned to face her. "What regulation?" "Effective immediately, all roof snow removal activities must cease at sunset. We have had multiple complaints about the noise, the lights, and the disruption to the peaceful evening atmosphere our residents expect." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You are joking, right? Deborah, we live in Colorado, at the base of the mountains. We can get 3 feet of snow in a single storm." "I am aware of our geographic location, thank you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The rule stands. Violations will result in fines of $500 per incident. So when a storm dumps snow overnight and into the evening and the forecast says more is coming, you expect us to just leave it on our roofs? You can remove it before sunset. Plan accordingly." She handed me a printed notice. "This applies to everyone in the community. No exceptions." I looked at the paper, noting it had been signed by all 5 board members. This is insane. Roofs can collapse under that much weight. "Then I suggest you stay on top of it during daylight hours. Have a nice day, Quincy." She walked away, her boots crunching in the snow, already heading to the next house. I went inside and called my neighbor, Marcus, who lived 3 houses down. He was a contractor and had been in Pine Ridge for 7 years. "Yeah, I got the notice too," Marcus said when I explained why I was calling. "Complete nonsense. But you know Deborah. She has been on a power trip ever since old Mr. Henderson retired from the board." "Someone is going to get hurt," I said, "probably, but try telling her that." Last year, she fined the Petersons for having their trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. Those cans were behind their fence. After hanging up, I pulled up the weather forecast on my laptop. A massive storm system was heading our way, expected to arrive Friday evening and continue through the weekend. The meteorologists were predicting anywhere from 30 to 40 inches of snow, with the heaviest accumulation happening at night. My house was a 2-story Craftsman with a standard pitched roof, about 2,400 square feet of roof space. I had already done the calculations when I bought the place, knowing the snow load capacity was rated at 30 pounds per square foot. Fresh powder was not too heavy, but when it started to compact, or if it got wet, that weight added up fast. 40 inches of heavy wet snow could easily exceed the design limits. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I went to Home Depot and bought additional roof rake extensions, making sure I could reach every part of my roof from the ground. I also invested in a high-quality LED work light system that ran on battery power, completely silent. Then I did something that most people would not think of. I installed small load sensors in my attic at strategic points. These wireless sensors would tell me exactly how much stress my roof structure was experiencing at any given time. The critical part of my plan was what I did next. I contacted a structural engineering firm in Denver, explained the HOA situation, and paid them $3,000 to perform a complete assessment of my roof, including its load-bearing capacity and current condition. They provided me with a detailed report, stamped and certified, that outlined the exact risks of allowing excessive snow accumulation. More importantly, they documented their recommendation that snow removal should occur whenever accumulation exceeded 18 inches, regardless of time of day, to maintain structural integrity. On Friday afternoon, I knocked on Deborah's door. She lived in one of the larger homes in the community, a 4,000-square-foot colonial with dormers and multiple roof valleys, which meant snow would accumulate unevenly and create stress points. "Quincy, what do you want?" she asked through her screen door. "I wanted to give you this." I handed her a copy of the engineering report. "It is a structural assessment of my roof. Based on the projected snowfall, I will need to remove snow after dark this weekend to prevent potential collapse. I am informing you as a courtesy." She barely glanced at the document. "The rule is clear. No snow removal after sunset. If you violate it, you will be fined." "Deborah, this report states that failing to remove snow could result in structural failure. That is a safety issue that supersedes HOA regulations. I do not care if it is stamped by the president himself. Rules are rules." She started to close the door. "I also wanted to let you know," I said quickly, "that your roof has a much larger surface area than mine with multiple valleys. You might want to consider having it assessed too. My roof is fine. Goodbye, Quincy." The door shut. The snow started Friday evening at exactly 6:15, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. I was sitting in my living room, watching through the window as the flakes began to fall. They were big and heavy, the kind that accumulates fast. Within an hour, there was already an inch on the ground. By midnight, we had 12 inches and it was still coming down hard. I checked my roof sensors. The load was still well within safe limits, but it was climbing. I made myself some coffee and settled in to monitor the situation. Saturday morning brought another 8 inches, and the snow showed no signs of stopping. I got suited up and went outside with my roof rake. Several of my neighbors were doing the same thing. The HOA rule said nothing about manual removal from the ground, so technically we were in compliance as long as we did not go up on the roofs or use loud equipment. Marcus was out in his driveway, struggling with his rake. "This is ridiculous," he shouted over the wind. "I cannot reach the upper sections." "Do your best," I called back. "Storm is supposed to continue through tonight." By sunset Saturday, we had accumulated 30 inches, and the snow was getting heavier as the temperature dropped and rose again. The lower layers were compacting, and when I checked my sensors, I did not like what I saw. I was at 70% of my safe load capacity. I waited until 7 p.m., a full hour after sunset, then I went out with my equipment. I had dressed in dark clothes and used my silent battery-powered lights. The roof rake extensions let me reach every section of my roof, and I systematically pulled down the snow, working section by section. It took me 3 hours, but when I was done, my sensors showed I was back down to 30% capacity. Sunday morning, Deborah was at my door at 8 a.m. "I saw you," she said, her face red with cold and anger. "You were out there last night after dark. That is a $500 fine." "Do you have photographic evidence?" I asked calmly. "I saw you with my own eyes." "That is not sufficient for a fine under HOA bylaws. You need documented evidence. But go ahead and issue the fine if you want. I will be happy to contest it." She glared at me. "You think you are so smart." "I think I am trying to keep my house from collapsing. You should be worried about yours. How much snow do you have up there now?" That is none of your business." She turned and stomped away. The snow continued all day Sunday. By evening, we had 42 inches total accumulation, and the weight was enormous. I checked my sensors constantly. Despite my removal the night before, I was back up to 65% capacity. The snow had gotten wet and dense as temperatures fluctuated. At 9 p.m. I went out again. This time I was more careful, working quickly and efficiently. I knew Deborah was probably watching, but I also knew she would have to prove I was removing snow and not just doing general property maintenance. The distinction was subtle but important. As I worked, I noticed that none of my neighbors were outside. Their roofs were heavily laden with snow, and in the darkness, I could see the stress on some of the structures. Marcus's garage roof was visibly sagging in the middle. I finished my own roof and was putting my equipment away when I heard it. A deep, resonant cracking sound like a tree splitting in a forest. It came from down the street. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the sound. The Peterson house, 3 doors down, had lost their back porch roof. It had collapsed entirely, crushing their patio furniture and narrowly missing their hot tub. Lights were coming on inside their house. Tom Peterson came out in his bathrobe. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Is everyone okay?" I asked. "We are fine, we were inside, but look at this." He gestured at the wreckage. "This is going to cost thousands to repair. You need to get the snow off your main roof right now," I said. "It is under the same load. But the HOA rule says no removal after dark. I will get fined." "Tom, your porch just collapsed. Your main roof could be next. A fine is better than your house caving in." He looked torn, staring at the destruction, then up at his snow-covered roof. "I do not know." I left him there and walked back home. I could not force people to protect their own property. When I got inside, I sent an email to the HOA board, copying all 5 members, documenting what had happened and reiterating my concerns about the snow removal policy. I attached my engineering report and photos of the Petersons' collapsed porch. Monday morning was clear and cold. The storm had passed, leaving everything buried under more than 3 feet of snow. I was up early, checking my sensors and monitoring my roof. The overnight cold had frozen everything solid, which actually helped distribute the load more evenly, but it also made the snow heavier. At 10 a.m. my phone rang. It was Marcus. "My garage roof just collapsed," he said, his voice shaking. "Came down about 20 minutes ago, crushed my truck. Is anyone hurt?" "No, thank God. But Quincy, my truck is totaled. The whole roof came down right on top of it." "Did you call the fire department?" "They are on their way. But what do I do about the HOA? They are going to say I should have removed the snow during the day." "You did. I saw you out there yesterday morning. This is on them and their stupid rule." Within an hour, 3 more roofs had partially collapsed in the neighborhood. A section of the Miller's roof caved in, destroying their upstairs bathroom. The Rodriguez family lost their sunroom. And then, at 2 p.m., I got a call from a number I did not recognize. "Is this Quincy Jameson?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is Linda Rodriguez. I am on the HOA board with Deborah. I just want you to know that some of us tried to stop this policy. We are calling an emergency board meeting tonight to suspend the rule. Is Deborah on board with that?" There was a long pause. Deborah's roof just collapsed. The whole center section came down into her living room. She is at the hospital. "Is she all right?" She was in the kitchen when it happened. "She is okay, just shaken up and has some minor cuts from broken windows. But Quincy, she is talking about suing you." "Suing me? For what?" "She says you convinced people to ignore the HOA rules, and that is why everyone's roofs collapsed. She is saying if people had just followed the policy and removed snow during daylight hours, none of this would have happened." I almost laughed, but it was not funny. Linda, that is insane. The engineering report I had done explicitly stated that the snow needed to be removed as it accumulated, especially during overnight storms. My roof did not collapse specifically because I removed snow when it needed to be removed. I know, and I am on your side. But I wanted to warn you, she is talking to a lawyer. After hanging up, I immediately called my own lawyer, a guy named Robert Chen who had handled my house purchase. I explained the situation and sent him all my documentation. "This is straightforward," Robert said. "You have a certified engineering report that recommended exactly what you did. You warned the HOA and specifically warned Deborah about her own roof. You have email evidence of that. And you complied with getting proper assessments. She does not have a case. She is going to try anyway. Let her. In the meantime, I would suggest you document everything. Take photos, get statements from neighbors, save all communications." I spent the rest of Monday doing exactly that. I photographed every collapsed roof in the neighborhood. I talked to 8 different neighbors, all of whom were dealing with damage ranging from minor leaks to catastrophic collapse. Every single one of them said they had been afraid to remove snow after dark because of the fine threat. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the community center. I showed up early and found the parking lot already full. Apparently, everyone wanted answers. Inside, the room was packed. All 5 board members were at the front table, including Deborah, who had a bandage on her forehead and looked furious. The moment she saw me, her eyes narrowed. Linda Rodriguez, who I now recognized as the reasonable voice on the board, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming. We are here to address the recent roof collapses and discuss our snow removal policy." "There is nothing to discuss," Deborah interrupted. "The policy was clear. If people had simply followed it and removed snow during daylight hours, we would not be in this situation." "Deborah, 12 houses have structural damage," Linda said. "Your own roof collapsed. The policy was flawed." "The policy was fine. The execution was the problem." Deborah pointed at me. "And we have people like him who decided to ignore the rules and encouraged others to do the same." I stood up. "That is not true, and you know it. I followed proper procedure. I had my roof professionally assessed by a licensed structural engineering firm. That report, which I provided to you, clearly stated that snow removal would be necessary during overnight accumulation. I warned you about this before the storm." "You violated HOA policy," Deborah shot back. "Multiple times. I prioritized structural safety over an arbitrary rule. My roof did not collapse. Neither did the 3 other houses in this neighborhood whose owners also removed snow overnight. Everyone who followed your rule is now dealing with insurance claims and repairs." Marcus stood up from the back. "My garage is destroyed. My truck is totaled. And you are trying to blame us for following the rules you put in place." Tom Peterson was on his feet next. "I lost my entire back porch. I did not remove snow after dark because I was afraid of the fine you threatened. This is on the HOA." The room erupted in angry voices, everyone talking over each other. Linda had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. "The board will take a vote," Linda said firmly. "All in favor of immediately suspending the snow removal time restriction." 4 hands went up. Only Deborah's stayed down. "Motion passes," Linda said. "The rule is suspended effective immediately. Furthermore, I am proposing that the HOA establish a fund to help residents with deductibles for the damage repairs." "Absolutely not," Deborah said. "That would be an admission of liability." "It is the right thing to do," Linda countered. "Our policy directly contributed to this disaster." The debate continued for another hour, but eventually, a compromise was reached. The HOA would provide low-interest loans to affected residents for repairs, and the snow removal time restriction would be permanently rescinded. Deborah was outvoted on every measure, and by the end of the meeting, she was practically vibrating with rage. As people filed out, she cornered me in the parking lot. "This is not over. You are going to pay for undermining my authority." "Your authority?" I kept my voice level. "Deborah, 12 families have significant property damage because of a rule you pushed through. You are lucky no one was seriously hurt. I followed proper procedures. I had board approval. You ignored expert advice and common sense. I have everything documented. If you want to sue me, go ahead, but I promise you it will not end well for you." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think you are so smart with your engineering degree and your reports. You are a troublemaker, and I am going to make sure you regret moving to this neighborhood." I walked away without responding. There was no point in engaging further. Over the next week, the extent of the damage became clear. The total cost of repairs across the neighborhood was estimated at over $400,000. Insurance companies were involved, and they were asking serious questions about the HOA policy that had prevented residents from removing snow during the storm. Then things got interesting. Marcus called me on Wednesday morning, a week after the collapses. "Quincy, you need to see this. The structural engineer who came to assess my garage found something." "What?" "The roof trusses were substandard. They were not built to code. And he is saying the same thing is true for at least 6 other houses in the neighborhood, including Deborah's." I felt my stomach drop. "Are you saying the builder cut corners?" "That is exactly what I am saying. The engineer is recommending we bring in the county building inspector." This could be huge. It was huge. Within 3 days, county inspectors were crawling all over Pine Ridge. They discovered that the developer who had built most of the neighborhood, a company called Summit Ridge Developments, had systematically used substandard materials in the roof structures of 18 houses built between 2019 and 2021. My house, built in 2022 by a different builder after Summit Ridge went bankrupt, was not affected. The news got worse. Summit Ridge had been owned by Deborah's brother-in-law, Richard Whitmore. The company had folded amid financial troubles, but not before building out most of Pine Ridge. And here was the kicker. Deborah had been on the HOA board during the entire construction period. She had been responsible for reviewing and approving the builds. "This is a massive conflict of interest," Robert Chen told me when I brought him up to speed. If she knew about the substandard construction and approved it anyway, or if she approved it without proper oversight because of her family connection, that is potentially criminal negligence. Can that be proven? That is what the county is looking into now. But Quincy, this changes everything. The roof collapses were not just because of snow load. They happened because the structures were not built to withstand normal snow loads in the first place. The scandal exploded across Boulder County. Local news picked up the story. A reporter named Jennifer Martinez from Channel 7 came to interview me, and I showed her all my documentation. The engineering report, the emails to the HOA, the photos of the collapses, everything. The story aired on Thursday evening. HOA rule leads to roof collapses, but investigation reveals deeper problems, was the headline. Jennifer's report detailed the snow removal policy, the subsequent collapses, and then dropped the bombshell about the substandard construction and Deborah's connection to the developer. By Friday, the county district attorney's office had opened an investigation. They were looking into whether Deborah had knowingly approved substandard construction. whether there had been any financial benefit to her, and whether her snow removal policy had been designed to obscure the construction defects by preventing the kind of heavy snow loads that would expose the weak roof structures. That last part had not occurred to me, but when the DA's investigator, a serious woman named Agent Sarah Kowalski, came to interview me, she explained the theory. If Deborah knew the roofs were substandard, she might have pushed the snow removal policy to prevent accumulation from exceeding the defective structure's capacity. But she could not enforce daytime-only removal during the worst conditions, which is when the most snow accumulates. Essentially, she may have been trying to manage an impossible situation rather than expose the fraud. But that makes no sense, I said. The roofs collapsed anyway. Right, because her plan could not account for a storm of this magnitude dumping snow primarily during overnight hours. She was trying to prevent the inevitable. Over the next month, the investigation expanded. Records showed that Deborah had received a significant financial gift from her brother-in-law right after the bulk of Pine Ridge construction was completed. A check for $75,000 labeled as a family loan, which had never been repaid. Building inspection records showed she had signed off on multiple phases without proper third-party engineering review, which was required by county code. The evidence suggested that, while Deborah may not have initially known about the substandard construction, she likely discovered it at some point and had been trying to manage the situation to avoid exposure rather than coming clean. The snow removal policy appeared to be part of that management strategy, however misguided. The DA charged her with 3 counts: criminal negligence, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The criminal negligence charge related to her approval of construction she knew, or should have known, was defective. The fraud charge related to the financial payment from her brother-in-law in exchange for favorable oversight. The obstruction charge related to her attempts to conceal the defects through the snow removal policy and her threats against residents who discovered the problems. The arraignment was in March. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom with Marcus and several other neighbors. Deborah arrived in a dark blue suit, her lawyer beside her. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The judge read the charges. Deborah pled not guilty to all counts. Bail was set at $50,000, which she posted immediately. As she left the courtroom, she did not look at any of us. The HOA, meanwhile, was in chaos. Linda Rodriguez had taken over as interim president, and one of her first acts was to commission a full structural review of every house in Pine Ridge. My house, as expected, passed with flying colors. The 18 houses built by Summit Ridge all required significant remediation work, with costs ranging from $30,000 to over $100,000 per house. The HOA's insurance carrier initially tried to deny the claims, arguing that the defects were pre-existing and not covered. But Robert Chen, who had started representing several affected homeowners in a class action suit, argued successfully that the HOA's negligent oversight constituted a covered event. Eventually, the insurance company settled, agreeing to cover 70% of the repair costs, with the HOA covering the remaining 30% through a special assessment. That special assessment hit everyone in the community, including me, for about $8,000. It was frustrating paying for something that was not my fault, but it was better than watching my neighbors go bankrupt over repair bills. The trial began in September. I was called as a witness for the prosecution, primarily to establish the timeline of events and to present the engineering report I had commissioned. On the stand, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named District Attorney Patricia Vance, walked me through everything. Mr. Jameson, when you received the HOA notice about the snow removal restriction, what was your reaction? I was concerned immediately. We live in an area with heavy snowfall, and I knew that limiting removal to daylight hours during a major storm would create dangerous conditions. And what did you do about those concerns? I hired a professional structural engineering firm to assess my roof and provide recommendations. I also brought those concerns directly to Miss Whitmore, the HOA president. And how did she respond? She dismissed them entirely. She said the rule stood regardless of safety concerns. DA Vance entered my engineering report into evidence and then showed the email chain between Deborah and me. The emails made her look terrible, showing her repeated dismissal of legitimate safety concerns. Deborah's defense attorney, a slick guy named Gregory Morrison, tried to paint me as a troublemaker during cross-examination. Mr. Jameson, is not it true that you deliberately violated HOA policy? I prioritized structural safety over an arbitrary policy, yes. So you admit you violated the rules. I followed the recommendations of licensed engineers over the demands of an HOA president who had no relevant expertise. If that is a violation, then yes, I violated the rules to prevent my house from collapsing. But your house was not at risk, was it? It passed structural review. My house passed because it was built correctly, but I did not know that for certain at the time. I only knew I had 18 inches of heavy snow on my roof with more coming, and engineering standards said it needed to be removed. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution brought in county building inspectors who testified about the code violations. They brought in engineers who explained how the substandard roof trusses could not handle the design loads. They presented financial records showing the payment from Deborah's brother-in-law. And they called residents who testified about the pressure Deborah had put on everyone to comply with the snow removal policy, including threats of fines and legal action. The defense tried to argue that Deborah had not known about the construction defects, that the payment from her brother-in-law was a legitimate family loan, and that the snow removal policy was simply a response to legitimate noise complaints from residents. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, they found Deborah guilty on all 3 counts. Sentencing was scheduled for November. The judge, a stern man named Judge Harold Keating, was clearly not impressed with Deborah's conduct. Miss Whitmore, your actions put numerous families at risk. You prioritized your own interests and the protection of your family member over the safety and welfare of the community you were elected to serve. This is a profound betrayal of trust. He sentenced her to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution of $200,000 to affected homeowners and was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Deborah's face was pale as the sentence was read. Her lawyer immediately filed an appeal, but it was denied 3 months later. She reported to the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility in January to begin her sentence. The aftermath took years to fully resolve. The class action suit against Summit Ridge Development's bonding company resulted in an additional settlement that helped cover the remaining repair costs. Richard Whitmore, Deborah's brother-in-law, was charged separately with fraud and building code violations. He eventually pled guilty and served 6 months in jail plus 5 years probation. Pine Ridge slowly recovered. The damaged roofs were all repaired or replaced, this time with proper materials and inspections. The HOA implemented new oversight procedures, including mandatory third-party review of any construction or major policy changes. Linda Rodriguez ran for permanent president and won easily. running on a platform of transparency and common sense. As for me, I became known as the guy who fought the HOA and won. Neighbors would stop me on walks to thank me for documenting everything and standing up to Deborah. I never set out to be any kind of hero. I just wanted to keep my house from collapsing and thought everyone else should have the same opportunity. My roof, throughout the entire ordeal, never sustained any damage. Every time it snowed that winter and the next, I went out and cleared it, whether it was day or night, using the methods my engineering report recommended. Other neighbors did the same. There were no more collapses. 2 years after the trial, I ran into Linda at the community center during an HOA meeting. We were voting on updated architectural guidelines, nothing controversial. "You know, Quincy," she said after the meeting ended, "Pine Ridge is a better place because of what happened, as terrible as it was at the time." "How do you figure?" We were all sleepwalking. Following rules without questioning them, trusting people without verification. The roof collapses and everything that followed woke us up. Now people pay attention, they ask questions, they demand accountability. I thought about that as I drove home that evening. She was right in a way. The whole disaster could have been avoided if people had been more engaged from the beginning, if someone had questioned the construction quality, if someone had pushed back on unreasonable policies sooner. But that was the thing about HOAs, I realized. They worked on the assumption that most people would not pay attention, would not push back, would just comply with whatever rules were handed down. That assumption gave people like Deborah power they were not qualified to have, and that they often abused. The lesson was simple. Pay attention to who is making decisions about your property and your life. Question things that do not make sense. Do not be afraid to be the one person who stands up and says, "This is wrong," when everyone else is going along to get along. My engineering report, which had cost me $3,000 and seemed excessive at the time, had saved me from tens of thousands in damage, protected me legally, and ultimately helped expose a much larger fraud. It was the best $3,000 I had ever spent. The last I heard, Deborah was released from prison after serving 14 months with good behavior. She moved out of state, somewhere in Arizona according to the neighborhood gossip. Her house in Pine Ridge was sold to a young couple with 2 kids who seemed nice enough. Life in the neighborhood returned to normal, or as normal as anything ever is in an HOA community. There were still occasional disputes about fence heights and mailbox colors, and whether someone's Christmas lights were too bright. But nothing ever reached the level of absurdity of the snow removal ban. Every winter, when the first big snow comes, I go out to my garage and check my roof sensors. I pull out my rake extensions and my silent LED lights. And when the snow starts to accumulate, I clear it off, day or night, whenever it needs to be done. My roof stays perfect, just like it did during that first terrible storm. Several of my neighbors have asked me to help them set up similar monitoring systems. I have started a little side business doing structural assessments and snow load monitoring for houses throughout Boulder County. It turns out that standing up to an unreasonable HOA policy and having the engineering expertise to back it up makes you the go-to person when other people have questions about their own properties. Marcus rebuilt his garage with proper materials and engineering, and his insurance covered most of it. The Petersons rebuilt their back porch even better than before. The Rodriguez family turned their sunroom collapse into an opportunity to expand and improve the space. Everyone affected found ways to come back stronger. I learned something important through the whole experience. Documentation is everything. The engineering report, the emails, the photos, the sensor data, all of it combined to create an unassailable record of what happened and why. Without that documentation, it would have been my word against Deborah's. And in that scenario, the HOA president usually wins. But with documentation, with professional expertise backing up my decisions, with a clear paper trail showing I had tried to warn people and follow proper procedures, I was untouchable. That lesson has stuck with me in everything I do now. If it is important, document it. If someone gives you a rule that does not make sense, get expert opinion on why it is wrong. Create a record that cannot be disputed. The HOA dynamics have shifted dramatically since the scandal. Board meetings now are well attended, with residents actually reading the proposed policies and asking tough questions. New board members are vetted carefully, with background checks and reference calls. The days of rubber stamping whatever the president wanted are over. I still live in Pine Ridge, and despite everything that happened, I like it here. The views of the mountains are spectacular, especially in winter when everything is covered in fresh snow. The community of neighbors who went through the crisis together has become genuinely close, with regular get-togethers, and a sense of mutual support that did not exist before. Sometimes, I think about what would have happened if I had just complied with the snow removal ban, if I had tried to clear my roof during daylight hours only and hoped for the best. My house probably would have been fine since it was built correctly, but I would not have known that. I would have spent that entire storm weekend terrified that my ceiling was going to cave in, and I would not have had any recourse against the HOA because I had not documented the unreasonableness of their policy. Or worse, what if I had complied and my roof had collapsed anyway? Then I would have been facing massive repair bills with no one to blame but myself for following a stupid rule. The choice to push back, to hire the engineers, to remove snow when it needed to be removed regardless of HOA threats, was the right call. Not because I wanted to be defiant or cause trouble, but because it was the only reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. 3 years have passed since that first terrible winter storm. Pine Ridge has become a case study in HOA reform, with several articles written about what went wrong and how the community recovered. I have been interviewed multiple times by journalists, and even spoke at a conference about HOA governance and the importance of prioritizing safety over arbitrary rules. The irony is not lost on me that the very thing Deborah tried to prevent, exposure of the construction defects, happened anyway because of her attempts to cover them up. If she had come clean when she first discovered the problems, if she had worked with the HOA and residents to address the defective construction proactively, she might have avoided criminal charges. Instead, her cover-up made everything worse. That is another lesson I have taken to heart. Problems do not go away because you ignore them or try to hide them. They get worse. The only way through a difficult situation is to face it head-on, with honesty and transparency, even when that is uncomfortable or costly in the short term. My house stands as a testament to proper construction and proper maintenance. While 18 other houses in Pine Ridge required major structural remediation, mine needed nothing. Every winter I maintain it carefully, clearing snow as needed, monitoring the load on the structure, and making sure everything stays in perfect condition. The whole experience has made me somewhat of a local expert on HOA issues, construction quality, and snow load management. I get calls from people across Colorado asking for advice on dealing with their own HOA problems or assessing their roof structures. I always tell them the same thing: get professional assessments, document everything, And do not be afraid to stand up for what is right even if it means going against the people in charge. Last winter, during a moderate snowstorm, I was out clearing my roof around 10 p.m. when a car pulled up. It was one of the new residents, the couple who had bought Deborah's old house. "Excuse me," the man called out. "Are we allowed to clear snow after dark? I tried to read through the HOA rules, but there are like 50 pages of them." I walked over to their driveway. "There used to be a restriction, but it was rescinded. You can clear snow any time you need to." "Oh, good." I was worried because we are getting another 8 inches overnight according to the forecast, and I did not want to wake up to trouble. "Clear it whenever you need to. That is what matters." He thanked me and went to get his equipment. I watched him for a moment, this new resident who had no idea about the battle that had been fought over this simple issue, about the roofs that had collapsed, and the lives that had been disrupted, and the HOA president who went to prison. For him, it was just common sense. Snow on roof, remove snow. That was how it should have been all along. I finished clearing my roof, checked my sensors one last time to confirm everything was good, and went inside to warm up. Through my window, I could see my neighbors doing the same thing, taking care of their properties when it needed to be done. Not according to some arbitrary schedule, but based on actual conditions and needs. That was the real victory. Not the trial or the conviction or the policy change, but the simple fact that people could now use their common sense to maintain their homes without fear of punishment for doing the right thing. It seemed like such a small thing, but it had required a massive fight to achieve. I made myself some hot chocolate and sat by the window, watching the snow fall. My roof was clear, my house was safe, and my neighborhood had learned valuable lessons about governance, accountability, and the importance of questioning authority when it stops making sense. The storm that had threatened to destroy everything had instead revealed the truth and made things better in the long run. Sometimes that is how it works. The pressure reveals the cracks, and once you see them, you can fix them properly instead of just covering them up and hoping they hold. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Beer tomorrow. Want to hear about my new project?" I texted back confirmation. Life had moved on as it always does. The crisis had passed, the damage had been repaired, and we were all building something better from the wreckage. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and beautiful, accumulating on the roofs of Pine Ridge. But this time, people would clear it when it needed to be cleared, day or night, based on engineering and common sense rather than the arbitrary dictates of an HOA president on a power trip. That made all the difference. That made everything that had happened worth it. And my roof, standing strong and clear under the winter sky, was proof that doing things right, even when it is difficult, even when people tell you not to, is always the correct choice.